The city never slept. Neon lights reflected off the rain-soaked streets, and every droplet on the window whispered a story of dreams, success, and failure. Somewhere in a small apartment at the edge of that restless city, a young man sat awake, not because he couldn't sleep, but because he refused to. He had nothing. No money, no power, no plan. But he had something the world couldn't measure. A hunger. A hunger that made his heart beat faster every time he saw a supercar glide past him. A hunger that burned when he scrolled through photos of mansions, private jets, and people living the life he always imagined. He didn't envy them. He studied them. He didn't say, "Lucky them." He said, "Soon, me." The world around him laughed. "Dreams don't pay bills," they said. But he didn't argue. He just smiled. Because deep down, he already knew. Silence builds empires. Noise builds excuses. Every morning before the sun rose, he'd stare at himself in the mirror and whisper, "You don't need permission to become powerful. You just need discipline." It became his prayer, his fuel, his secret code. While others slept, he worked. While others doubted, he prepared. And while the world ignored him, he was quietly becoming dangerous. The kind of dangerous that can't be stopped once it starts moving. The first months were brutal. No recognition, no progress, just endless work and invisible effort. But that's where real power grows. In the dark. In silence. When no one believes in you, but luxury isn't just cars and mansions. Luxury is freedom. That luxury is waking up and choosing how to live your day. Luxury is when your parents no longer worry about bills. Luxury is when you walk through airports, knowing you built your own destiny from dust. He used to write on his wall in bold letters, "One day, they'll ask how you did it." Every failure became a lesson. Every rejection became redirection. He learned that pain is the entry fee to greatness, and that the people who win aren't the smartest. They're the ones who refuse to quit. Day by day, he evolved. He trained his mind to see possibilities where others saw problems. He replaced "I can't" with "I will." He stopped waiting for motivation and started living with discipline. Because motivation fades, but discipline? That's the weapon that separates the dreamers from the doers. Then one night, he looked out the window again. Same rain, same lights. Same city, but something was different. He realized he wasn't chasing luxury anymore. He was becoming it. Not because of the money, not yet, but because of his mindset. He'd stopped thinking like the broke man he was, and started acting like the king he would become. He started waking up at 4:30 a.m., not because he loved mornings, but because he hated being average. There's something about the early hours. The world is quiet, your mind is sharp, and the silence forces you to face yourself. Every morning, he'd make a cup of black coffee and sit with a notebook. Not scrolling, not chatting, not wasting. Just planning. Every goal was written like a contract with his future self. Not, "I hope," not, "I'll try," but, "I will." At first, it felt ridiculous. He'd write things like, "I'll own a mansion. I'll have a jet. I'll change my family's life. I'll become a name people whisper about." And every time, his mind whispered back, "Who do you think you are?" That's the first voice you'll have to kill. The one inside you that doubts your own potential. He learned to silence that voice with action. Each day, he'd do one small thing that moved him forward. Learning a skill, reading, building something, improving his body, sharpening his mind. He wasn't chasing motivation anymore. He was chasing momentum. Weeks passed, then months, still no big results. But slowly, the mirror began to reflect someone new. Not a broke dreamer, but a man with fire in his eyes. He stopped talking about his goals. Because real power doesn't announce itself. It arrives in silence. While his friends wasted nights drinking, he was building while they laughed at memes. He studied markets while they bragged about the temporary pleasure. He built permanent skills. He didn't need validation anymore. He didn't need approval. He had replaced both with purpose. People started noticing. Not because he told them, but because energy can't be faked. When you move like you're destined for greatness, the world starts to sense it. One night, while walking home after a long day of work, he saw a Rolls-Royce glide past. The sound, the presence, the aura. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement. He whispered to himself, one day. But this time, it wasn't a wish. It was a promise. He didn't want it just for the luxury. He wanted what it represented. Freedom, discipline, excellence, respect. He didn't want to flex, he wanted to inspire. To show that a kid who once had nothing could one day have everything. Not by luck, not by shortcuts, but by becoming obsessed with self-improvement. Each day became a test. Could he outwork his past self? Could he endure the loneliness that comes with chasing greatness? Could he stay focused when no one clapped? He learned the truth. You will lose people when you start winning in silence. Friends left. Distractions faded. But what replaced them was priceless. Clarity. He no longer chased attention. He chased mastery. And that's when life started to shift. The first opportunity came. Small, almost invisible. But he treated it like gold. He over-delivered, stayed humble, worked harder than everyone else, and life took notice. It wasn't overnight. It wasn't magic. It was the slow, steady result of consistency and hunger. He realized success isn't a jackpot. It's a habit. Every morning now, he'd open his notebook, same one from months ago, and smile. The dreams that once looked impossible were now goals in motion. He could feel something coming. Not luck, but momentum. He stood by the window, the city still glowing beneath him, and for the first time, he whispered, not one day, but it's already happening. Because success doesn't start when you get the car or the mansion or the watch. Success starts the moment you decide to never go back to who you were. The morning light came differently now. It wasn't that the sun had changed, it was him. When you start aligning your life with purpose, even sunlight feels like it's shining for you. He woke up before his alarm, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The same hunger that once burned with frustration was now turning into fuel. Every step, every task, every failure, it all started to make sense. He had been planting seeds for months, and one morning, finally, one of them began to grow. It started with a small message, an opportunity that most would have ignored. Too small, too insignificant, not worth the time, but he saw it differently. He'd learned that every big door is hidden behind small chances. So he said yes. He worked on it like it was the most important project of his life. Days turned to nights, and nights blurred into mornings again. Sleep was secondary. Excellence was priority. And then it happened. Payment received. Not much, but enough to change everything. Not his bank balance, but his belief system. Because that first dollar you earn from your own effort, that's not money, that's proof. Proof that you can turn ideas into reality. Proof that you can beat the system that tells you to stay average. He looked at the notification on his phone, smiled and whispered, "It begins." That moment, he didn't buy anything fancy. He didn't post a picture or brag. He just closed his eyes and remembered every night he almost gave up. And promised himself he never would again. He started reinvesting every dollar. Not in clothes, not in parties, but in skills, tools, and knowledge. Because he'd learned that the greatest luxury isn't what you wear, it's what you know. He studied the rich, not just how they spent money, but how they thought. He noticed they didn't chase, they attracted, they didn't react. They planned, they didn't seek comfort. They built power. He began shaping his habits around theirs. Every morning, cold shower, reading. Strategy, every night, reflection, gratitude, preparation. He was sculpting his future like an artist shapes marble, one precise strike at a time. Soon, his circle changed. Not because he rejected people, but because his energy started speaking a language only a few could understand. He stopped talking about others. He started talking about ideas, systems, investments, vision, and the world noticed. Opportunities started arriving, not because he was lucky, but because he was ready. Luck is just preparation meeting timing, and he'd been preparing for years. He closed his first big deal, a moment he'd dreamed about for years, he remembered. Every night he'd whispered to the empty walls, "You'll see me one day." Now the world was beginning to. He didn't scream, he didn't flex. He just smiled quietly and got back to work. Because once you get a taste of success, you don't celebrate, you strategize. The first luxury purchase came months later. Not impulsively, intentionally. He walked into a watch store, not to impress, but to remind. The salesman showed him a collection of timepieces worth more than his old apartment. He didn't flinch. He'd earned this moment. He picked one. A silver chronograph, clean, powerful, timeless. As he wore it, he whispered, "This isn't about time. This is about how I used mine." That watch wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder that every second counts. Every wasted minute used to keep him broke. Every focused hour was building his empire. That night, he sat by the window again. Same view. Different man, below him. The city lights shimmered like diamonds scattered across the earth. He looked down, not in arrogance, but in gratitude. He knew he was still far from the top, but for the first time, he could see it. The road wasn't a mystery anymore. It was a path, and he was walking it, step by step. He whispered to himself, "You were never chasing money. You were chasing freedom, because luxury isn't just the car you drive. It's waking up knowing you control your life. It's not being told when to work, where to go, or who to be. Luxury is choice. Luxury is peace. Luxury is power." And now, he had his first taste of it. He promised himself that this was only the beginning. The mansion, the jet, the legacy, they were already written in his mind. All that was left was time and consistency. He smiled, leaned back and said quietly, "They won't understand now, but they will." The watch ticked softly on his wrist, each second a quiet reminder that time owed him nothing. He had bought it not to show the world he'd made it, but to remind himself that he was making it every moment or every breath. He realized something important. Owning luxury meant nothing if he didn't become the kind of man who could sustain it. Anybody could rent a car or borrow success for a weekend, but real power was to own the mindset that could buy it again and again. So he made a vow. "Before I build my empire outside, I'll build it inside." He started treating himself like an athlete of ambition. He trained his body because discipline in one area infects every other. 5 a.m. runs. In the rain became his meditation. The streets were empty, the air cold, but his heartbeat echoed with purpose. He'd whisper between breaths, "The world is still asleep, but I'm already earning hours they'll never get back." Each drop of sweat was an investment. Each repetition, a silent declaration. "I'm not the same man who started." And slowly, something shifted. His posture straightened. His speech became precise. He walked differently, not arrogant, but certain. People could feel it. When confidence comes from proof, you don't have to announce it. He learned how the rich moved, not just physically, but mentally. They didn't rush. They calculated. They weren't loud. They were clear. They didn't chase attention. They attracted respect. He started dressing better, not to impress, but to represent the future version of himself. Clothes became armor. Details became standards. He stopped wearing cheap cologne and started wearing focus, discipline, and intention. Every action whispered the same sentence: "I am becoming the man I once prayed to be." The first car came unexpectedly. A deal closed bigger than he had imagined. The deposit cleared. The numbers aligned. And suddenly, he was signing papers for his own machine. Black, sleek, polished metal reflecting a decade of quiet effort. The first drive was unforgettable. He didn't blast music. He just listened to the sound of an engine that once belonged to his dreams. He didn't think, "I made it," he thought. "I proved I could." Because luxury isn't supposed to make you stop. It's supposed to remind you how far discipline can take you. He parked it, stepped out, looked back once and said softly, "Thank you for waiting for me." But success brought something else: pressure. When you start to rise, you start to attract doubt, jealousy, and noise. People who once ignored you now criticize. You dot people who once laughed at you now question your character. He learned not to respond because lions don't explain themselves to sheep. He realized that every successful person lives with two lives, the one the public sees and the one built quietly when no one's watching. He chose to master the second. He doubled down on structure. Every morning had a purpose, every hour had a mission, every distraction was treated like a thief. The phrase maybe later disappeared from his vocabulary. He began networking, not with people who talked success, but those who lived it. Private dinners, mentorships, small circles where every conversation was a strategy session. He listened more than he spoke. He realized that the real wealthy talk about leverage, time, systems, and peace, not cars and brands. He learned that money was only a tool. Real wealth was control. Control over your schedule. Control over your energy. Control over who gets your time. One evening, after another full day of deals and calls, he sat on his balcony overlooking the city lights. He poured himself a glass of water, not champagne. He looked at the skyline and whispered, "I'm still not rich, but I'm already free." Because freedom doesn't start when your bank hits 7 figures. It starts when your mind stops needing permission. He smiled, remembering the version of himself who once stared at the same city through a dirty apartment window. That boy dreamed of cars and money. This man dreamed of impact and legacy. And he knew the real luxury was never the lifestyle, it was the evolution. He wrote in his notebook that night, "I don't want to be the man with money. I want to be the man money can't control." He closed it, placed the watch on the table, and whispered, "We're just getting started. Every empire is tested. The universe doesn't hand greatness to anyone. It asks, are you sure you want this? And that question never comes softly." He had tasted success, but now he was facing the part no one posts about. Pressure, exhaustion, and doubt that hits like a storm at midnight. Clients delayed payments. Deals collapsed. People he trusted disappeared the moment he stopped being useful. For a week straight, he barely slept. Coffee replaced meals. Silence replaced sleep. But inside that chaos, something unbreakable began to form. He realized pressure doesn't destroy the right person. It defines them. One evening, he stared at his reflection in the window. The city lights blurred through the rain. His own face looked unfamiliar, older, sharper, harder. He whispered, "If this is the price for greatness, I'll pay it every time." And then he smiled. Because he finally understood that pain was a sign of growth, not failure. He remembered his first notebook, the one with trembling handwriting and impossible dreams. He flipped through its pages, and at the bottom of one list he'd written years ago were 3 words: "Don't break character." That meant, no matter how rough it gets, act like the man you said you would become. So he did. He showed up every morning as if nothing was wrong. He negotiated with calm when his world felt like it was falling apart. He turned anxiety into planning, fear into fuel. He had learned to perform under pressure, and that's when most people quit. He started meditating, not in silence, but in motion. Long drives through the city at 2 a.m., engine humming like a heartbeat, his thoughts chasing clarity. He spoke out loud to himself. "You've been broke before. You've been doubted before. You can survive this too." Those drives became his therapy. Every empty highway was a reminder. Storms pass, but builders remain. And slowly, things began to move again. A new opportunity appeared. An overseas investor who had been watching his discipline from afar. The call came at dawn. The man said simply, "We've seen how you operate under pressure. Let's talk business." That's when he understood another truth. People don't invest in your success. They invest in your stability. The deal changed everything. Not just financially, but mentally. Because he didn't win because things got easy. He won because he got stronger. He took a flight for the meeting, his first time in business class. As the plane lifted off, he looked out the window, clouds glowing beneath him, and smiled. A few years ago, he used to watch planes and whisper, "One day." Now he was above the clouds whispering, "We're just getting started." In that moment, he promised himself 2 things. Never let comfort kill the hunger. Always be the hardest worker in any room, no matter how expensive the room becomes. The meeting went perfectly. The investor didn't just fund him, he respected him. Because confidence built from struggle cannot be bought. It's recognized. When he returned home, the city didn't feel the same. Every street corner, every neon light felt like it was part of his story. He wasn't chasing the city's success anymore. He was shaping it. He started mentoring a small group of people, the next generation of dreamers who reminded him of his old self. He told them, "You're not tired. You're unorganized. You're not unlucky. You're undisciplined. Get that right, and the world will open for you." They listened because his life proved his words. He drove them through the city, pointing at skyscrapers. Someone built that. Someone once dreamed it exactly the way you dream right now. The only difference between you and them is consistency. He wasn't trying to sound like a guru. He was just paying forward the lessons pain had taught him. One night, after another long meeting, he came home, dropped his keys on the marble counter, and stood silently in front of the window again. Same view, different level. He finally realized something that made him laugh quietly to himself. All the things he used to pray for, he now worked for naturally. The habits that once took discipline now felt like breathing. He didn't need motivation anymore. He was motivation. He whispered, "Luxury isn't the lifestyle. It's when excellence becomes your default setting." And that's when he truly became dangerous. He walked out onto his balcony, city lights stretching like an ocean of possibility. Below him, he saw a kid sitting on the curb, looking up at passing cars, the same way he once had. He smiled, because he knew exactly what that kid was thinking. He whispered softly into the night, "Keep going, kid. The view from up here is worth every sleepless night." And with that, he turned back inside, ready for whatever the next chapter demanded. When pressure finally turns to momentum, something strange happens. The world begins to bend around your focus. He was no longer chasing opportunities. They were finding him. Every message in his inbox carried potential. Every handshake opened a door. But he remembered his own rule: never confuse growth with noise. He didn't let fame distract him. He kept the same routines: 4 a.m. wake-ups, journal entries, workouts, study. He treated success like a fragile plant that needed daily water, because he knew the moment you relax, the world takes everything back. He started refining his craft. What others called work, he called practice. He wanted mastery, the kind that can't be faked on social media. So, he hired mentors. He took courses. He traveled to learn from people who were decades ahead. He listened more than he spoke, asked questions that mattered, and stayed humble even when people called him Sir. Mastery, he realized, isn't about knowing everything. It's about doing the simple things with flawless consistency. During one business trip, he found himself sitting in a hotel lobby lined with marble floors and chandeliers the size of cars. People walked by in tailored suits, conversations about markets and mergers flowing around him like music. He sat quietly, watching, not impressed, studying. He noticed how the most powerful people were the calmest. They didn't need to prove who they were. Their presence did that for them. He whispered to himself, "Stay calm, stay calculated, stay dangerous." That became his new mantra. He began to understand that wealth is simply the reward for managing complexity. The bigger the problems you can solve calmly, the bigger the life you can live. So he started seeking challenges that scared him. Every new project was a level up in disguise. Every setback a hidden teacher. He didn't fear difficulty anymore. He hunted it, because comfort was the enemy that had destroyed most men before him. As months passed, his lifestyle began to reflect his mindset. His apartment turned into a minimalist studio. Black marble, glass gold details, not cluttered with luxury, but designed for focus. He believed that environment shapes energy. If you want to think like a billionaire, Your surroundings must whisper order, not chaos. He bought his first piece of art, not because it was expensive, but because it told a story of resilience, a painting of a lion in the rain, eyes fierce, unbroken. He hung it above his desk every morning. He'd look at it before starting work and say, "Let the world throw the storm. I am the storm." His parents visited for the first time. They stood silently in his new home, eyes wide, hearts full. His mother touched the marble counter with disbelief. His father just smiled quietly. He didn't give a speech. He simply handed his father the keys to a new car parked outside. No words. No show, just a gesture, because some victories are too sacred for Instagram. That night, he wrote in his journal, "The day your parents stop worrying." That's the real definition of luxury. The next morning, he woke before dawn again. He walked to the balcony, looked over the city that once ignored him, and breathed in the cold air. He realized he was no longer fighting for survival. He was fighting for legacy. He wanted to build something that would outlive him. Companies, systems, ideas, people transformed by his vision. He whispered into the wind, "I'm not here to live quietly. I'm here to leave a mark." And with that, he turned back inside, sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and began another long day of work. Because the great irony of success is that the higher you climb, the more obsessed you become with the climb itself. That's how legends are made. Not by luck, not by fame, but by daily, relentless, quiet excellence. The plane's engines roared beneath him, a low vibration that seemed to echo the rhythm of his own heart. For the first time, he was flying not just for business, but for perspective. The skyline of another continent spread beneath him like a puzzle he was meant to solve. Years ago, he had stared at maps, imagining what it would be like to walk foreign streets, shake hands with people who lived on a scale he could only dream of, to see possibilities beyond the borders of his city. Now, he was living it. Luxury was no longer about possession, it was about access. Access to opportunity, knowledge, and people who had built empires he had only studied before. He landed in a city where skyscrapers gleamed like swords of steel, and the air was thick with ambition. Everything was bigger here, cars, deals, and even the stakes. He checked into a penthouse overlooking the heart of the financial district. The room was vast, marble and glass, with a view that made the city feel like a chessboard. He didn't come here to enjoy it. He came here to conquer it. The first meeting was with a potential investor from Europe, a man known for his ruthless precision and impeccable timing. Most people would have been intimidated. He felt respect, not fear. He sat across from him, confident but observant. "I've read your history," the investor said. "You've built a strong foundation, but can you scale it globally?" He leaned forward, calm and deliberate. "Scaling isn't about stretching your business, it's about stretching your mind. And I've already done that." It was true. He had been preparing for this moment for years, refining every skill, testing every system, and learning to act while others hesitated. The investor studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Most people can't answer like that. I like you." That night, walking along the illuminated streets of the city, he felt the hum of potential. Luxury in these places wasn't flashy. It was strategic. Every street, every building, every handshake was layered with purpose. He stopped at a cafe and watched the city move. People were chasing money. Some were chasing status. But the few who were truly wealthy, they were chasing freedom through mastery. That was his lesson. Luxury isn't about the shiny things. It's about the freedom to design your life, to move unhindered, to build relentlessly without asking for permission. Over the next weeks, he met innovators, investors, and entrepreneurs who had created global empires. They didn't impress him with logos or titles. They impressed him with discipline and vision. He learned that the richest people on earth weren't just brilliant, they were relentless. They thought in systems, planned in decades, and acted in hours. Most importantly, they protected their time and energy like it was a priceless asset, because it was. He began to understand the value of leverage. Leverage of capital, leverage of relationships, leverage of time luxury. he realized is meaningless if you don't control the levers of influence. During one business lunch, he sat at a table of high-level CEOs. The conversation wasn't about money. It was about systems, acquisitions, risk, and legacy. He realized that to play at this level, he had to think bigger than he ever had. No longer local, no longer reactive, global, proactive, and strategic. Later, alone in his penthouse, he reflected, "I've tasted comfort. I've survived struggle. Now, I will learn to dominate without distraction." He opened his journal and wrote, "This is the era of exponential growth. What I do today multiplies in the years to come. Everything is leverage. Everything is optional. Everything is power." The first luxury acquisition abroad came unexpectedly. A sleek, black sports car, handpicked not for status, but because it was an investment in credibility and access. Driving it through city streets, he felt the hum of the engine resonate with his ambition. It wasn't the car itself that mattered. It was the mindset shift it represented. He had earned the freedom to choose, and with choice comes responsibility. He had begun to understand something crucial. Luxury is a reflection of inner growth. You can't fake it. You can't borrow it. You can only earn it. And with that understanding, he began to see opportunities that others overlooked. Deals, partnerships, and investments appeared because he had built clarity, discipline, and reputation. By the end of his first month abroad, he had secured 2 major international deals, built relationships with industry leaders, expanded his mindset beyond anything he had imagined, and most importantly, he knew that this was only the beginning. Expansion isn't graceful. It's messy, unpredictable, and brutally honest. After weeks of international success, he faced his first real global setback. A deal he had meticulously planned collapsed, not because of lack of skill, but because of forces outside his control. The investor he had trusted disappeared. Partnerships fell apart, and some contracts were delayed indefinitely. It would have crushed a weaker man. But he had learned from part 1, pressure creates diamonds. He sat in his penthouse, the city lights stretching like rivers beneath him, and felt the familiar tug of doubt. For a moment, he let it whisper, "Maybe you're not ready." Then he laughed quietly. "I don't get ready. I adapt." Failure, he realized, was not the opposite of success. It was part of the path. Every billionaire he admired had walked through storms far worse than this. The only difference, they learned faster. He reflected on what went wrong, not with self-pity, but with curiosity. Questions became weapons. Where did I miscalculate? Who underestimated the timeline? Which systems failed? He knew the answers weren't important to anyone else. They were important only to him. He created a map of his failures, every misstep, every delay, every rejection. Then he turned it into a blueprint for resilience and strategy. "Every obstacle is a lesson disguised as a setback," he muttered, "and I'll learn faster than anyone else." The next day, he woke before dawn, cold air filling his lungs, and went back to work. Discipline doesn't pause for failure. It accelerates in response. He built redundancy into his deals. He diversified partnerships. He strengthened contracts. He reached out to mentors he had met abroad, seeking insight from those who had weathered storms greater than his own. And slowly, the tide began to turn. Failure had given him something success could not: clarity. He realized that the true mark of a global empire builder wasn't the number of deals closed. It was how quickly you could adapt, recover, and scale. He doubled down on systems, creating processes that minimized risk and maximized efficiency. He automated repetitive tasks, delegated strategically, and focused only on high-leverage decisions. Every minute of his day was measured. Purposeful, unstoppable, emotionally, he evolved too. He had learned to separate ego from strategy. No longer did rejection feel personal. No longer did failure feel like shame. He meditated on one principle: control what you can, ignore what you can't, execute relentlessly. This mindset became the foundation of his global empire. Luxury wasn't just a reward anymore. It was a byproduct of mastery, discipline, and mental toughness. During this period, he began traveling to new cities: London, Dubai, Singapore, Hong Kong. Every city offered a lesson in culture, strategy and opportunity. He observed patterns, connected dots that others couldn't see, and identified niches waiting for execution. He rented private workspaces in skyscrapers overlooking oceans of opportunity. He began assembling a team, not just employees, but operators who could execute with precision and think 2 moves ahead. His network became international. He attended dinners with global leaders, not for ego, but to understand the flow of influence and capital. Luxury became more than material possessions. He stayed in penthouses with sweeping views, drove high-end cars across cityscapes, and flew in private jets. Yet he measured success differently. A meeting that creates leverage. One night, a flashy watcher system that generates recurring income. A sports car mentorship that multiplies knowledge. A mansion he understood. Luxury was power converted into freedom. And freedom was the ultimate reward. By the end of this section of expansion, he had transformed. His mindset now operated globally. His failures had become tools for precision. His network spanned continents. His influence was increasing faster than his wealth. But most importantly, he had learned that true empire building requires patience, discipline, and emotional resilience. He whispered to himself as he overlooked a skyline in Dubai. They think this is wealth. It's just the training ground. And with that, he prepared for the next level, a stage where his influence, luxury, and vision would merge into a global legacy.